What's going on, everyone? This is Tyrone May here, Himalaya ride enthusiast and entrepreneur. I'm back here once again as I bring you chapter 14 from my book, The Himalaya, where the strobe flashes and the mirror ball spins. Continuation of my story of my fascination with the Himalaya ride and how it started for me, which leads to my journey to one day call one of those classic rides of my very own. So if you'd like to purchase a copy, you can get it on Amazon or my online store. We can get some Himalaya fan-based merch. The web address is shown below the screen. So, without further ado, I will bring you Chapter 14, titled An Empty Beginning. The late 1990s were the beginning of the whole bling craze. I wasn't really interested in jumping on the bandwagon until later that fall, when I suddenly started to have some thoughts of having a chain of my very own. However, the chain itself wasn't going to be the most important part. It was what I was planning to add to the chain. I began to have some thoughts about having a charm made to the shape of the original Himalaya cars. So one evening, I grabbed some paper and drew up the sleigh-shaped design along with the skier and star emblem. The design took about 4 tries until I was finally happy with what I had created. I simply had to make sure that the design wasn't too big and that it looked the same as the piece of the real sleigh-shaped car. After I finished drawing out my desired piece, I grabbed some scissors and cut out my design and then put it in a safe place. The next day I took my design, along with the only photo of the Himalaya I had while setting up the ride at the State Fair 2 years ago, and went over to the mall to visit a jewelry store where they made custom-made charms for chains. I explained to the jewelry maker what I wanted and showed him my design and photo. The jewelry gave me a quote of $350 to make the charm, which was a lot less than I expected, but at the same time, I wouldn't be able to pay it in full. The jeweler then suggested that I put $50 on the charm to start, and then every week or so I could put some more money down until the charm was finally paid off. I went ahead and gave him the $50. He gave me a receipt that I had to keep until I put some more money down during my next visit. From that day until the holiday season, I put in more hours at my job, which included more headaches and a lot more stress, but for my charm, it was well worth it. I hoped that my Himalaya charm would be ready before Christmas, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. I finally finished paying for my charm about a week before the holiday, but the charm was only halfway complete. The jeweler told me that there was more that he had to do with my charm before it was considered ready, and it wouldn't be done until sometime during the new year because he was going on vacation and would finish the charm as soon as he returned. I finally went to pick up my charm around February of 2000. While I was there, I looked for the perfect silver chain for my new charm, but I wanted something that wasn't too big, too skinny, or too expensive. But most of the chains I had my eye on were all of the above. I'd had to start saving up again, but I waited so long for my charm that I just didn't have it in me to go through yet another ordeal. So I left them all and looked for a chain somewhere else. I went to the flea market where I happened to find a chain that was the perfect size and fit well with my budget. The chain was only $35. To me, it didn't really matter if the chain was real silver or fake. As long as it didn't turn my neck green, I could not have cared less. I wore my chain everywhere I went, even if it was just to the store and back. Spring, my father made plans to take me on a weekend trip to Atlantic City for my 21st birthday. He picked me up from my house early Friday afternoon, and we headed down the road to New Jersey. I wasn't going to leave for the whole weekend without my new chain, of course, which I had grown and attached to more every single day. We finally reached New Jersey later that evening and we checked into a motel where my father had made reservations for us. Little did I know that my father had paid for separate rooms, which was one of the best things he's ever done for me. It felt great having my own space, even if it was just for the weekend. Though we could have had separate cars for this occasion, I was just happy to have some privacy and peace and quiet for a change. After we checked into our rooms, it was off to the casinos where I had my first experience at the slots and lost a few bucks. We returned to the motel around 2 o'clock that morning. As relaxed as I felt that night, I wasn't ready to turn in just yet. So I made myself comfortable and watched a movie on the television until I finally dozed off. The next morning, after a good night's sleep, my father called me on the phone in my room and told me that we were going to check out some more resort towns. I jumped in the shower, got dressed, and put on my chain, which I placed beside my bed every night so that it would be the first thing I saw every morning. After we left the motel, we got some breakfast at a nearby diner before going out to do some sightseeing. I personally had plans to do some sightseeing of my own. I wanted to visit an amusement park at the pier that I saw on television a few years back, but unfortunately I just could not remember the name of the park or where the park was located. I did remember, however, that this park had an original Himalaya ride that had pink mountains all around the top and outside scenery panels around it, which I thought was interesting. I really wanted to visit this ride in person and to see what the inside looked like, not to mention ride it. I also wanted to purchase a camera so I could take some pictures of the ride. I wanted to start my own Himalaya scrapbook, which I had begun to have some serious thoughts about since the end of that previous year. The first place my father and I went to that day was a beach resort called Ocean City. Ocean City, New Jersey was a bit different than the Ocean City that I was used to in Maryland. As we strolled on the boardwalk, the first place I was obviously looking for was the amusement park in hopes of finding the mysterious Himalaya I'd seen on television. When I spotted the amusement park, I found that most of the rides were either not open or weren't set up yet. I saw every type of ride, but unfortunately the Himalaya wasn't one of them. However, it was pretty cool to see most of the rides that were either half set up or in their trailers. I still had some thoughts of purchasing a small disposable camera, but since I didn't see the Himalaya, my thoughts of buying a camera quickly went out the window. We left Ocean City an hour later and went to another beach resort where we spotted another amusement park. It was a bit larger than the previous park we had just visited. But just like the other part, there was no Himalaya ride in sight, and most of the other rides were not open yet. We walked around some more to see the other places in this resort town. It was a beautiful day, and the cool breeze was just right as we cruised the boardwalk. My charm on my chain shimmered in the hot sun like the mirror ball on the Himalaya ride, which I had been looking all over for that day. I figured that maybe we weren't at the right place, and I still had no idea where the park I had seen on TV was or the name of it. We left the beach and went back to our hotel rooms where we stayed until later that evening. We returned to the casinos to once again try our luck at the slots. Though I was a bit disappointed that I didn't see the Himalaya or had any idea where it was located, I still had a great weekend. I was at my job on Friday night when I had a conversation with a gentleman named Jake, who was one of my coworkers at the time, and we started talking about the upcoming state fair. We discussed how much the fair had changed since the new carnival came to town, with different rides, and the fairground turned to a big slab of concrete. I told him about my experience working at the Himalaya at the State Fair of '97. I also mentioned talking to a lady from the Ghost Train ride about how much I wanted a Himalaya ride of my very own someday, and she told me about her brother who had worked for a manufacturer who built amusement rides. I never thought of getting information about the company, which I still regret to this day, even though I had no idea where the original Himalaya rides actually came. As I told Jake everything, he told me that he would look up something for me on the internet and he should have all the information by that next week. Jake came in on that following Friday as I was getting the DJ booth set up for a night skating session. Jake came into the DJ booth and handed me a small stack of papers that were stapled together. I looked at the stack of papers. There were ads for used amusement rides that were for sale. The first page had a bunch of different Himalaya rides, along with the Flying Bobs, Music Express rides, and everything in between, which were all labeled as music rides. Not only did they have music rides, the next pages had all other types of rides, such as the Gravitron, Enterprise, Pirate Boat rides, and I even saw some Topspin rides on there. The ads were from a website called iTail International, which happened to sell used amusement rides of all kinds. Minutes later, it was time to open, and in all the teenagers who were pumped for another Friday night of skating. So I put my papers away until it was time to leave. When I got home hours later, I had the chance to get a closer look at the first page of the music rides, and also information on where the rides came from, the year the ride was built, and the condition they were in. As I read the information about the rides, I learned about the names of all different manufacturers that made these wonderful classic rides. I learned that the Flying Bobs were from a manufacturer named Chance Rides, and the Music Express was from manufacturers named Mack from Germany, and another manufacturer named Bertazon, which is in Italy. I saw a couple of Himalaya rides that were the original design. I learned that a manufacturer named Revachon in France had building these rides all along. So this is where the company where the Himalaya came from, I said to myself, smiling from ear to ear. Most of these music rides were made in the 70s, and the prices were in the hundreds of thousands, but some of the rides were $50,000 to $90,000 for a used ride. I can imagine how much it would cost for a brand new ride straight from the factory. It would definitely cost a hell of a lot more than a used ride. Now that I was 21 years old, I started playing the lottery every now and then, but I never bought more than $3 worth of Powerball tickets. I never had any luck, but I still kept playing the Powerball whenever I can. I hope to win the big jackpot so someday I could finally buy my own Revachon-built Himalaya ride. The Delaware State Fair came back to town 2 months later, along with the return of the colorful speed demon, the Hittin' 2000 Music Express ride. This time I visited the fair with a few friends that I met that previous year, Quincy and Elliot, who then didn't live too far from me. Quincy and Elliot asked if they could tag along when I stopped by to see them on my way to the fair. Even though they liked going to the fair every year, they weren't as into the rides as I was, so they went their way and I went my way to buy some tickets. I then headed over and made my way to the Hittin' 2000 ride. It had been a whole year since the fair changed, but it still felt a lot different being there without the original Himalaya and its legendary mirror ball and the winter-themed snow bunny artwork. Still, I was happy to see the Hittin' 2000s again, along with some other different rides the Carnival brought that year, including the Mega Drop, and this other tall and unusual ride called the Turbo Force, which was not on the Midway at the time. Instead, it was set up where some of the concessions were located near the grandstand. On the Turbo Force, each gondola was attached to both sides of an extremely tall structure that turned as it flipped riders in midair. I tried the Mega Drop. It was a pretty nice rush, but I also wanted to try out the Turbo Force until I found out that it cost $10 to ride it, which I thought was a bit strange. Unfortunately, I hadn't bought enough extra money, so I quickly walked away and headed back over to the Hittin' 2000 where I spent the majority of my time. Later that day, I took a break from the ride to look for my main pal Hilton, who had decided to travel with the Carnival that previous year. I hoped to eventually run into him to ask how everything went with traveling from place to place. I searched every single ride around the whole Midway, but he was nowhere to be found. I started to get tired of walking, so I went over to the concession to get something to drink and sat down at one of the tables where some of the other workers were sitting. I asked them if they knew Hilton and where he was, but they told me that he may be in another state working with a different unit. One of the guys explained to me how the different units worked. They were identified by colors such as the orange unit, blue unit, the yellow unit, etc. Each unit travels separately to different states, but they sometimes join together in certain spots depending on the location. After I finished my drink, I got up and walked around some more before I went on any more rides. As I walked down the Midway, my stepbrother Antonio spotted me. My father brought him and Shakim to the fair that evening. The first thing Antonio asked me was whether I had ridden the Hittin' 2000. Of course I told him I had. Antonio asked if he could ride it with me. So we made our way over to the ride where my father and Shakim went on another ride. While Antonio and I rode the Hittin' 2000, Antonio asked me if I liked this particular ride better than the original Himalaya. I proudly told him that the original Himalaya ride would always be my number one ride. However, I liked the Hittin' 2000 for similar reasons, such as the lighting and the speed. It was also a nice looking ride, but that didn't mean that I was completely over the Himalaya being gone. I had hoped to see an original Himalaya return to the fairgrounds someday, just like the good old days. After the ride was over, we headed back to the solid ground where we met back with my father and Shakim. Minutes later, we said our goodbyes, and I went my way to enjoy the rest of my evening. After staying over at my father's house, I went back to the fair that following Monday during wristband night. This time, Antonio tagged along with me along with one of his friends named Ashton, who invited to come with us. During the beginning of the day, we all hung out together and rode the Hittin' 2000. The three of us sat together, and because I sat on the outside, I had the daylight squeezed out of me. Unfortunately, some of the rides that were two-seaters, and it didn't allow single riders, and I had already had too many bad experiences when it came to not being able to ride on a certain ride because I couldn't find anyone to ride with me. So to save myself from going through that same old crap again, I let Antonio and Ashton go on their way as I went my way. I went on a few other rides, but I spent most of my time riding the Hit 2000 until we all met up again during the last hour of the fair. After the fair left town, withdrawal started to kick in. I hoped to start driving to Ocean City for a change since I had a car and had finally become more independent. But I had so many issues with my car, having one problem after another, that I just couldn't risk being stranded in the middle of nowhere. Fortunately, one of the regulars at the rink named Jason invited me to go to Ocean City with him and a few of his friends. Now, I hadn't been invited to go anywhere with friends since I had lived in my old neighborhood in Dover. I felt like an outcast throughout the years since I moved, and I always had trouble making new friends no matter how hard I tried. But I was fortunate that I had met a few new people in my life, so it was truly an honor for something like this invitation to happen to me. Jason told me that he had planned to go to Ocean City in a couple of weeks on his Sunday. He also mentioned that we would all visit Trippers Amusement Park to get on a few rides and meet up with some girls on the boardwalk. I told him it sounded like a great plan, and I was sure looking forward to our trip. 2 Fridays later, Jason arrived and told me that he had to cancel our trip due to mechanical issues with his car. Even though this wasn't the first year I couldn't make it to Ocean City, Maryland, this was the first time that I hadn't come in contact with an original Revachon-built Himalaya. It was not a good way for me to begin or end the first summer of the new millennium. I may have missed out on riding the original Himalaya as summer ended, but it wasn't such a lost cause as I thought it would be. Early that fall, we finally traded in my car for a good used SUV, which was in much better condition than my car. I couldn't help but look forward to finally having a chance to drive to Ocean City, Maryland for the first time that following year. I visited my father one day after work, and I was introduced to the internet, which was something I never had experienced until that day. I'll admit, I was a little afraid of it at first because it was something I had never done before. I had no clue what the hell I was doing. My father showed me how to use the internet and told me that I could search up anything I desired right there on the web. The first thing that came to mind was to search for Himalaya rides, and before I knew it, a lot of websites came up that featured Himalaya amusement rides. There were Himalaya rides for sale like Agtel International, which was the main website that I spotted. Also, there were websites on different carnivals that had Himalaya rides, such as straight shows, and amusement parks such as Trippers Rides. There were other amusement parks that had Himalaya rides as well. While searching for more photos of the original Himalaya, I happened to stumble on a website of an amusement park in Texas named Wonderland Park. On this site, I noticed there was a map that gave an idea what the park looked like and what kind of amusements it had. This map had different icons which were in shapes of various rides and exhibits that the park had, along with a small box which revealed the name of the ride. One of the icons on the map had a familiar shape, so I pointed the arrow to the icon to see what it was. The word Himalaya appeared in a small box. Without any hesitation, I clicked on the icon and a beautifully painted Revachon-built Himalaya appeared on the screen. This Himalaya was designed just like the one at Trippers, and it looked like it was pretty well kept over the years. The outside artwork looked amazing, but I had really hoped to see some photos of the inside of the ride as well, although I could see well enough that this ride had the traditional sleigh-shaped cars with the chrome skiers and star on each car, number 1 to 24, along with the large mirror ball in the center of the ride. This Himalaya ride had all its traditional features, but I wanted to see more of what this particular ride had. So I took the time to write the park an email requesting some detailed photos of the Himalayas, such as the eternal artwork, the mirror ball, and some of the lighting. After I finished my letter, I clicked on the send icon and continued to look for some more photos of the original Himalaya rides. The internet had it all, and the more I got used to searching the web, the less I wanted to stop. As I became more comfortable using the internet, the fall season suddenly didn't seem as depressing as it once had been. I felt like I had struck gold when I saw different photos of the Revachon-built Himalaya rides, especially ones that were for sale. I used the mouse to click on Agtel International to get a closer look at the Himalaya rides that were for sale. I clicked on the photos of the Revachon-built Himalaya rides, which gave me larger photos of what the ride looked like up close. One of the Himalaya rides looked like the others, but it had a different name, Avalanche. It was made in the mid-1970s. It was in mint condition, which explained why it looked like it was in such great shape. The photo only showed the overhead shot of the ride, so I couldn't see how the inside looked. But by the look of the top scenery panels and the cool lettering of the lighted sign, it looked like the ride still had all its original artwork, which was something that I liked. Although it had a different name, this ride had all the features that were usually on a traditional Revachon-built Himalaya ride, such as the snow-themed artwork with skiers and the snow bunnies in tight outfits. It also had the sleigh-shaped cars with the metal skier and stars, and they were all numbered from 1 to 24. Just like any other Himalaya ride, it had the center canvas with 24 blue stars and one big 12-point star in the center canvas in the center where the mirror ball sat and spun. I spent about 2 hours that evening on the internet searching for photos of Revachon-built Himalaya rides. I printed out all the photos that I saw on my father's printer. Unfortunately, they all came in black and white. I was just glad that I had some photos so I could finally start my new scrapbook. After I printed out the photos, I shut down the computer and gathered up the photos and got ready to go home. My father came into the room and asked me if I enjoyed my experience using the internet. Definitely, I answered back to him. My father told me that I could stop by any time to use the internet, and I did. From that day on, every time I visited him, whether it was a few hours after work or a whole weekend, I was on the internet non-stop looking for photos of the Himalaya rides built by Revachon. I found some really cool carnival websites that had a couple of photos of the Himalaya that I printed out and planned to add to my scrapbook, as well as other sites that manufactured and sold amusement rides. One day when I went to visit, I made my way back to the computer room and immediately logged on to the internet. The first thing I did was check the email. I was excited to find out that I received a response from Wonderland Park. The letter mentioned that they were planning to add some new lighting and another set of speakers to the ride, and they would send me some photos of it all as soon as they could. I immediately wrote back to the park and gave them my mailing address while fantasizing about receiving some cool new photos of the Himalaya with the scenery and new lights. Even if I was lucky, I would receive some amazing close-up photos of their mirror ball in the center of the ride, which would be a great addition for my scrapbook. The more I thought about the photos, the more anxious I became. I started checking in my mailbox a week later. A few weeks went by and there was still no sign of any kinds of photos heading my way, so I gradually stopped going to the mailbox every day and started to move on. One day I was online. I found a photo of a Himalaya ride on one of the used rides websites. It was, of course, being manufactured by Revachon that really caught my eye. It was a super Himalaya, but it looked like any other Himalaya ride. The photo wasn't as clear as I hoped, but it showed the inside of the ride. I could tell that it still had the original artwork along with the sleigh-shaped cars and mirror ball. This ride also had the slight snowflake-shaped decals on the tunnel, similar to the Himalaya ride at Trippers, but this Himalaya ride also had flashing lights on the tunnel as well, which I had never seen on a Revachon-built Himalaya before. The ad on the site said it was manufactured in 1980 and it was in great condition. I may not have that kind of money, but it didn't stop me from dreaming about being the next guy to own that ride. I thought about adding new disco lights and a fog machine if I ever owned that ride. I had some cool ideas for that ride, or any Himalaya ride I had hoped to own someday. However, one thing I would never change, and that was the original artwork on any Himalaya ride. I had always had a fascination with the painted artwork on the Himalaya rides. I could never put my finger on exactly why, but there was always something special about the painted skiers and mountains. Every time I feasted my eyes on the artwork when I visited the Himalaya in Ocean City, Maryland, it put a smile on my face and it somehow made me forget about everything I went through on a regular basis. It always made me overcome anything in my life. While I was searching for more Himalaya rides built by Revachon, I wondered if the manufacturer had a website. So I went to the search icon and typed in Revachon. I found a website called Revachon Industries of Samoa, France. It mentioned that they were a ride manufacturer. I clicked on the website where I saw the company logo. Everything was written in French. Luckily, the website had a button that translated everything to English, so I could see what this manufacturer was all about. Revachon's website presented photos of some of the rides that the company had produced. I saw photos of some roller coasters, flume water rides, and other types of thrill machines. The only rides I didn't see were the Himalaya type rides. I didn't want to think about it, but I figured that maybe Rebishon didn't make Himalaya rides anymore. Fearing being correct on such a significant subject, I immediately wrote a passionate letter to the company. I told them about being a fan of their Himalaya rides and about my dream to purchase one of my very own someday. I requested some information about the Himalaya rides, the name of the artist who painted the artwork, and some cool photos. After I finished writing my letter, I clicked on the send button and went back to search for more photos of Rebishon built Himalaya rides for my scrapbook until it was time for me to start heading home. Every time I went over to my father's house, I checked the email to see if Rebishon had responded to my letter, but no such luck. I also checked the website where I saw the used Super Himalaya to see if it was still there. I hoped and prayed every day that no one bought that Himalaya. I needed to win the Powerball so I could buy it. I knew my chances were very slim, but I didn't care. I wanted that ride. The holidays were around the corner. The rink was throwing a Christmas party, and that year I wanted to bring my Himalaya model for everyone to see who saw me at the rink that only knew me for what I did at my job. I wanted to have a chance to show them all, especially the Friday night regulars who some of my coworkers invited to the party, another side of me that they hadn't seen. A few weeks before the Christmas party, I did some serious maintenance on my model to make sure everything from the model itself to the lighting was in perfect condition. Early on that day of the Christmas party, I packed up everything that went with my model, including the extra disco lights, my Walkman that played the siren tape, and all the cords I would need for the model's different functions. I put everything in a large box and packed it in my car. I waited until I was ready to leave to pack the model itself, especially ever since I left my model in the hot sun for days back in the summer of 1997. I became more protective of my model, especially when I planned to show it off to the public. Later that evening, I packed my model inside my car and left about an hour before the party started to give myself plenty of time to set everything up. When I arrived at the rink, I saw my boss and a few coworkers heading to the snack bar. They were in the process of getting all the food set up for the party. There was a skating class going on out on the floor as I searched for a perfect spot in the building to set up my model. I found an extra picnic table no one was using, and I moved it to the corner of the building away from the skating floor. After I found my desired spot, I grabbed a cart and went back to get my model and its box of accessories and start to set up everything. After every cord was connected and the strobe and disco lights were in the positions, I tested my model to make sure that everything was working properly and ready to go. The Christmas party was underway about 10 minutes later. More people arrived and the skating class finally came to an end for the evening. While I was giving my model one last test run, a tall African-American gentleman from the skating class spotted me in my model and came over. He was very impressed with what he saw. "Did you build that?" he asked. "I sure did," I answered back, and I then told him about myself and my interesting hobby. The gentleman introduced himself as Edward. He was there with his two sons who immediately called over to see my model and meet me. As my model spun, the light show changed, the siren wailed, and the strobe flashed. Their faces lit up brighter than the lights on my model. Edward asked me how long I've been building models of the Himalaya and some other related questions. I told him I had been building models of the Himalaya ride since I was 6 years old, and I had been interested in the Himalaya ride since I was about 4 years old. Edward then started asking me about college, which was a kind of touchy subject for me. He was so impressed with my talent that I couldn't bear to tell him about my fear of going back to school due to a few bad experiences I had in the past. Even though I really wanted to go to college and have a career with which I could be proud, I just couldn't help but think about everything I had been through back in high school. So as a result, I never gave him a straight answer. As the party began, I was approached by more onlookers who came to the party. Everyone, including my boss, came to check out my model. It left everyone truly amazed. I ran my model throughout the whole night, just as I would if I operated the real thing at the fair, at Trippers, or any other park or carnival. My Himalaya model turned out to be a huge hit with everybody throughout the whole evening. I had visits from everyone who came to the party from beginning to end. Some people asked why there weren't any little people in the cars. I told them that I couldn't find any hobby stores anywhere. Then someone mentioned a hobby store located in Dover, which had all different kinds of stuff. I was dumbfounded to find out there was actually a hobby store around all this time. During the last 20 minutes of the party, I started shutting down my model and packing up everything. I took the time to stop at the snack bar to fix myself a plate before I hauled everything in my new truck. During the drive home, I couldn't help but think about finding the hobby store, mainly because I had hoped that they had some kind of model contest at the shop. It would be my chance to show off my model at a different location. I didn't have to go into work the next day, so I had plenty of time to find the shop and to browse around a bit. I left the house early that following day to find the hobby store, not only to find some sitting figures for my model, but also to find out if they had any contests there. After I found the hobby store, I went inside and I couldn't believe what I saw. There were models, games, and everything someone could think about. The place was huge. I was greeted by the shop owner who asked me if there was something he could help me find. I mentioned that I had built a scratch-built model of a well-known amusement ride and I needed some sitting figures. The shop owner showed me to the aisle where he kept all the different types of figures. There were different types of little plastic figures from sitting to standing, from big to small, and from fat to skinny. I found packs of sitting figures, but I felt that they were either too big or too tiny for my model. At the last minute, I found a large pack of figures in the sitting position that was just about the right size I needed. There were 3 separate packs of men, women, and children, so I bought all 3 packs, which cost me a pretty penny. After I went to the counter and paid for everything I had selected, including glue, I asked the shop owner if there was any kind of model contest held there. He told me that there was going to be one in February. I felt like I was taking a gamble, but out of curiosity, I asked what kind of models someone could bring in. The shop owner told me that I could bring in any kind of model to the contest, from store-bought to scratch-built. Perfect, I happily shouted out. I told him that I had been looking for a contest to show off my model, and I would definitely be in this one. Before I left the shop, he gave me the date of the contest, which I wrote down on a piece of paper. After I left the shop, I went straight home to glue the new figures on the seats of my model. Once the glue dried, my Himalaya model was officially complete with its own full load of riders. I plugged in my model right away so I can give it a test spin to make sure that every figure stayed in place, especially when I put the model in full speed. It had been about 2 months since I first wrote to Revachon Industries, and I still hadn't had any response from them. I decided to write to them again and to ask why they were taking so long to write back to me. I told them that I visited their website, but I didn't see their Himalaya rides, and I wanted to know why. I checked the email again the next time I stopped by my father's house, that I finally had a response from the manufacturer. I was pretty nervous about it at first, but I couldn't hesitate about opening it any longer. I clicked on the message, which simply titled Himalaya, and I read something that would change my life forever. The letter mentioned that they were happy to hear from such a devoted fan of one of the products, but unfortunately they no longer manufacture their Himalaya rides. Hearing those words from a company that I had finally found, after all those years of wondering where the Himalaya rides came, dropped such a huge bomb on me like that it almost felt like a death. I had always dreamed that I would finally own one of their Himalaya rides. I had longed to visit their factory to see for myself where and how all the Himalaya rides were made piece by piece. I had also wanted to meet the mystery artist who was responsible for painting such beautiful artwork. But now all my childhood dreams were been destroyed. I decided to write back to the manufacturer right away because I needed some answers as soon as possible. I also wondered if they had stopped manufacturing Himalaya rides because of that accident that happened at that carnival, even though they shouldn't be held responsible for someone else's negligence. I just had to know why the Himalaya rides had been mysteriously discontinued. When I went back the next day to check the email, I had a reply from this manufacturer that took me by surprise. It was from the same man who had written to me. He told me after reading my letter, you couldn't help but feel sorry about the whole situation because he knew how much I had wanted to own one of the Himalaya rides. He told me that the main reason why the Himalaya rides were no longer manufactured was because more companies were building Himalaya rides that were more portable and flashier. He mentioned that their company actually had plans to create an updated version of the Himalaya, one that still had the features of their original version, but sadly became more of a money issue, so they decided to just continue the ride altogether. I was totally crushed about their decision, but slowly I began to understand the situation. I had always thought about owning a brand new Himalaya like the one I worked during the fair in 1997, It would be cool. But then I started to have more of an interest in their older Himalaya rides from the 70s and 80s when the ride had hand-painted artwork inside the tunnel and on the back of the ride, just like the Himalayas at Trippers and Straight Show's Himalaya ride. Now that was the kind of Himalaya ride that I would like to have of my very own someday. And there you have it. That was chapter 14. Hope you enjoyed it so far. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and let me know what you think. And if you'd like to buy my book, you can buy it on Amazon or my online store, along with tons of fan-based merch. I'll be back here next month with chapter 15. So as we say in the Himalaya world, keep that mirror ball spinning. Take care.